Things have changed. I think you started 50 years ago, you had a vision. And that vision, at the time, people thought was a little wild, a little crazy. And I remember hearing about your vision maybe 25 years ago, because I lived in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
And there was like, oh yeah, there's this group, and they're thinking they're kind of make psychedelics, healing, legal. And I'm like, that's just weird. Like, that's never going to happen. I can't remember, maybe Reagan was president at the time. I can't remember.
Right.
So maybe just talk a little bit about where that vision came from and how you trusted yourself enough to kind of be able to sit here today and see so much momentum and progress.
Yeah.
Start there.
There was the story that my parents told me was that I was part of this multi-generational process. And it began with Jewish people fleeing anti-Semitism, my great-grandparents in 1880 coming to America, my grandfather in 1920 from Poland, great-grandparents from Russia, and that then they made a success in America. They found freedom. They were able to make a success, and that then they were able to make it so that the mission that they sort of told me was that we're going to make sure you don't starve, we're going to make sure you got a place over your head, but we want you to work on deeper threats, in a sense. And these deeper threats, were sort of taught to me in terms of the Holocaust. I was just educated very early on about the Holocaust and trying to grapple with that. Then it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and now the whole world could go up, and then it was Vietnam. And that was one of the last years of the lottery. And I had studied Gandhi and Tolstoy and Thoreau and nonviolence. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I respond? Now it's my own country.
Yeah.
What do I do? And I thought that I would serve my country by going to jail, that I would not run away and pretend I had bone spurs, as we've heard.
Seems pretty effective, but yeah.
It did work. And so I decided that I would not register for the draft, and that I had a passport, a driver's license, social security number, paying taxes, all these things, and you just assume, oh, the government is so efficient, they're going to figure it out. Well, they didn't even notice. And roughly 60,000. Then I thought, should I tell them so they put me in jail? But when I was planning that, my parents were like, oh, that's good, but you're going to be a felon and you'll never be able to be a doctor or a lawyer. My dad's a doctor. And I was like, okay, I'll just have to sacrifice all of that.
Yeah.
Then when I started understanding about psychedelics, I was like, this is great. Now I've got a new way to do this. That it gives this sense of connection. So I felt that psychedelics could be the antidote to genocide, the antidote to othering, the antidote to racism. And I thought I could be an underground psychedelic therapist, and there's no license required. I can do that. And so that became my plan when I was 18 years old in 1972. Of course, it was after reading Stan Groff.
Oh, yeah, right.
And this was amazing. I was super confused, and I went to the guidance counselor at college. I'll just
said
add,
you want to be a psychedelic guide.
Yeah. Now, you may have heard about DeSantis in Florida, governor, going after education.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to squash this college, new college. It was the Honors College of the state of Florida. But at the time, 72, it was a private school, and the guidance counselor took me seriously, and he gave me Realms of the Human Unconscious, observations from LSD to read.
Right.
And I loved it, and I was like, this is it. I don't trust religion so much. My bar mitzvah was a massive disappointment. I really...
It was not a deeply spiritual experience?
It was a nice party.
Yeah.
I got some presents, but I somehow thought it was going to be a transformational experience. And, I remember waking up in bed the next morning, and I'm like, I'm the same. Nothing happened. And every morning, and then a week goes by, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a whole new crop of bar mitzvahs. I'm off the list. It's not going to happen. But I started thinking, this is what my bar mitzvah should have been when I started doing LSD. But I had to, which actually...
The new bar mitzvah that's arising in our culture.
Which actually then, because I knew I was hungry for that next level when I was 13. So my wife and I, when each of our 3 kids turned 13, we said to them, if you want MDMA or you want marijuana, come to us and we'll give it to you and we'll do it together. We didn't realize that was the best possible anti-drug strategy. You
don't want to do what your parents do.
I was like, we're not ready. No way. Don't give it to us. I felt really bummed out. I was like, fortunately, later on, they did come around. You know, and I'll just share one fast thing, and then which was my son and a bunch of his friends were traveling through Europe after their junior year of high school, and they ended up at Boom Festival, which is the world's most psychedelic-friendly festival in the world.
Okay.
And so I was working at psychedelic harm reduction there, and we knew the moms and the parents of all these other kids, my son and his 3 friends, and my wife was like talking to them and the other moms, and they were like, are these kids going to end up doing drugs at this festival?
Right.
You know, and she said, well, Rick, he's not so good with prevention, but he's really good with rescue. Anyway, they did get MDMA, and I said, okay, I'm right by if you need any help. And I had this vision, oh, my son, he's going to take MDMA, and he's like, I love you, Dad. It's all great, and I just haven't been able to say it. So, of course, what happened is they get the MDMA, and they split. And we didn't see him for 24 hours.
Oh, shit.
And then my son comes back, and the only thing he tells me, he says, Dad, now I understand why you want to make this into a medicine.
Oh, wow.
It was beautiful. He didn't tell me anything about him, but like that.
Didn't.
So I say the last piece is that in my early 20s, I had a dream, and it was the most important dream of my entire life. And I can still remember it very vividly. Now, this was after I had decided to focus on psychedelics. It was a few years after that. And the dream was of a dying man on his deathbed, and I was there with him. And he was telling me this story that he had almost been killed, and he survived, and he always felt that he survived for a purpose, but he didn't know what the purpose was. And he said, let me show you what happened. And then we go back into World War II, and there's thousands of Jewish people lined up in front of an open grave, and they're all machine gunned and pushed into this grave. And I sort of was with him for days while he was, in the dream at least, while he's buried. And it was kind of a Jesus story, too. On the 3rd day, he sort of came to, and he climbed up through the bodies. And
This is all in the dream?
This is all in the dream. And then it's at the edge of town. He ran off into the woods and survived. And I think, this is horrible. And then we're back in the room on his deathbed, and he says, now I know what my purpose was. And I was like, well, okay, well, what was it? And he said, well, it's to tell you to study psychedelics and to bring back psychedelic research and to do this because we were dehumanized. But if people can understand how we're all in this connected, then that is, again, trying to prevent this from happening. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, I've already decided to do this, so I can take this from you, and you can die in peace. And then he died right in front of my eyes in this dream. And then I walk out of this room, and I'm sitting by a stream, and there's this water going by. It's kind of like Siddhartha or something, you know, watching by the stream. And then I noticed there's this young boy sitting next to me. And I'm like, who is this boy? And then I realized I recognize him. I was friends with his father. And at this time, I had a very large LSD stash. And I was worried about getting busted. And so his father held my LSD stash for me at his house. So whenever I wanted to do LSD, I would go to his house and get some. And so when I connected this little boy with LSD, then the whole dream was completely ended. And then, so I've always felt since then that I've been surrounded by privilege with underneath of it this terror and fear. And the privilege has given me this freedom and safety in a way to address this terrifying fear that we could end up blowing up the world or killing each other. So whatever the DEA did or whatever the FDA did or whatever obstacles were put in the way, however long it took, now this is the 38th year of MAPS, it was nothing to giving up and maybe one day ending up in a concentration camp. And you know how close we came to authoritarianism in the United States.
Yeah, very
And we're not out of the woods at all. And you always wonder, how could the big lie succeed in Germany? How could it succeed? It's so illogical. And we know now that it's not a matter of logic. And one of the things that Adam Kinzinger said during the January 6th hearings, that, and this is kind of far away from psychedelics, but I'll say one of the things he said struck me so much. He said he's learned that there is something that people are more scared of than death, and that is being kicked out of their tribe.
Wow.
And so I think there's so much of this tribal thing. So the
Yeah.
big lie, the bigger of a irrational thing it is, the more of a commitment it shows to believe it, and then you're with your tribe.
Yeah.
So I think what's been, for me, this motivating force has been this sense that collectively we can solve all of our problems. We are brilliant in our minds, but our emotional and spiritual capacity is so far behind our intellectual capacities that we have technology that could destroy the world through climate change. Who knows what's going up with AI, all these things. And so what we need is this evolution of the spirit, an evolution of emotions.
That's exactly what Wisdom 2.0 was created for.
Yeah.
But really, it was like it's the internal technologies that we're going to either kill us or save us, but the external technologies are going to get faster and more advanced and more powerful. And the question is, well, the inner world will also rise to that occasion.
Yeah,
And
and I think that's why we're coming together here now at this moment.
Yeah,
We have that
yeah.
same kind of sense, is how do we help us transform what we're doing into a real Garden of Eden?
Yeah.